On Mother's Day, my son, a young, wealthy, busy businessman, came to see me. He held a bouquet as bright as a Sunday morning. He set it on the oak table, looked at me with a gentle but distant gaze, and asked, "Mom, my wife still sends you $2.4 million every month, right? I just want to make sure you're comfortable." I froze. My heart started pounding. $2.4 million? For the past 8 months, I'd been living on food bags from St. Anselm's Mission and small donations from the neighbors along the shore. I whispered, my voice trembling, "Son, the church is helping me get by." He stared at me. The smile slipped from his lips. Then my daughter-in-law appeared, radiant in an old money-chic silk dress, glittering heels, and a cloud of expensive perfume that drifted through the room like mockery. Her smile dazzled, but her eyes were colder than any winter I've ever known. She didn't realize that on that very day, the last light of her elegance would fade for good. If you're still here with me, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is a mark on this road, and if this story touches you, don't forget to hit like so it can travel farther. My name is Ruth Ellison, 69, a widow living alone in a little seaside bungalow in Santa Barbara, California. The house faces the Pacific, the place where my husband Edward and I raised our only son, Adrian. After Edward died of a heart attack 10 years ago, I learned to slow down, tending a small garden of sea glass and shells, cooking simple meals, sometimes guest teaching Bible class at St. Anselm's Mission down the street. I didn't have much, but it was enough, until age knocked, prices climbed, and the night wind off the water slipped through the seams of my roof. Adrian, the boy I once carried, now a tech millionaire at 39. He runs Ellison Meridian Capital, lives out in Hope Ranch, Montecito, drives something expensive, in a home where the maintenance alone would keep me up at night. Of course I was proud. I raised him with these hands, believing he'd grow into a kind, grateful man. So when he walked into my house that afternoon, sunlight spilling across his tired but handsome face, my heart warmed. Until he spoke. "Mom, my wife still sends you $2.4 million every month, right?" It felt like someone sucked the air out of the room. My heart slammed against my ribs. My fingers clenched the edge of my worn apron. I tried to smile, but my lips were dry as sea salt. $2.4 million, I repeated, my voice catching. "Son, the church is helping me get by." Adrian's eyes widened. The smile dissolved. He glanced at the woman who had just stepped in. Clara, his wife, in a pearl-collared silk dress and silver heels. A niche fragrance flooded my small living room, overpowering the warmth from the turquoise kettle steaming on the stove. Clara smiled faintly, a smile that could melt a room if it weren't so cold. "Oh, Mother, you must have forgotten," she said sweetly, honey poured over ice. "I stop by every month to bring the money, remember?" I looked at her steadily. "If you brought it, it must have gotten lost somewhere," I said, barely above a whisper. The room went silent. Far off, the mission bell chimed. On the wall, the tide clock inched its hand, counting each word I swallowed. Outside, the sound of waves. Inside, the thud of my heart. Adrian looked between us, between the gray-haired mother in an old apron and the glamorous wife in a designer dress, his brow furrowing. "Clara, you have been bringing the money, right? I transfer it to you every month." Clara tilted her head, her smile unchanged. "Of course, Adrian. I come here every month. Maybe Mother just forgot, old age. The memory isn't what it used to be." The words were soft as feathers, but they landed on my heart like stone. Old age. I've heard that phrase too many times since Edward died, from people who think an old widow is nothing but a fading memory. But I know my memory. I remember every bill, every prayer, every face at church, and I know, without a shadow of doubt, that Clara has never handed me a single cent. I nodded slightly and chose silence. Some battles aren't fought right away. They're observed. Adrian stood and set a hand on my shoulder. "Mom, it's probably a misunderstanding. I'll check the accounts. I just want you to live comfortably, without worry." I smiled faintly, but something inside me had awakened, a quiet storm of suspicion and resolve. I said nothing more, just cleared the table and set a hot cup of tea in front of my son, the steam as thin as mist. Clara's gaze swept over me, cool, dismissive, the look of someone who believes money can buy integrity. The air turned cold. Even with the sun blazing outside, a chill ran down my spine. Clara glanced around, her eyes passing over the driftwood frames along the wall. Adrian as a little boy, brown hair, bright eyes, a carefree smile beside Edward. She exhaled lightly. "You've done such a great job keeping the house so clean, Mother, even at your age." I smiled thinly. "Old, yes, but not so old I can't remember who walks through my door, Clara." Adrian looked at me, uneasy. "Mom, come on, it's Mother's Day. Don't get upset." "I just want you to be happy, son," I said, my eyes still on Clara. "So do I. But happiness doesn't come from what people say they've done for you. It comes from what they've actually done." Adrian froze, and Clara's smile tightened, then disappeared altogether. After they left, I sat alone in the living room. Sunlight slid through the curtains and stretched across the oak table. 2.4 million a month. 8 months. 19.2 million. That money could have patched a salt-bitten roof, fixed a dead heater, and let me live out these late years warm and unafraid. Instead, I've been counting cans from St. Anselm's pantry and giving thanks for every donated loaf. I pressed a hand to my chest, not from anger, but from the ache rising inside me. A quiet ache, bone deep. That night, I opened the blue ledger, the cobalt leather notebook where I keep grocery lists and prayers. This time, I wrote something different. Find the truth, and beneath it, don't trust fake tears. I closed the book and drew a long breath. I am not weak. I have survived loss, loneliness, and struggle. I will survive this. Adrian may have been fooled, but I haven't. And if Clara thinks I'll sit quietly while she plays perfect, she chose the wrong woman to underestimate. I spent the rest of the afternoon in my small kitchen, the turquoise kettle still warm, the tide clock ticking up a notch, while the mission bell, somewhere out there, marked the moment I began to write it all down, the first piece in a justice built on evidence. The tea in the turquoise ceramic pot had gone cold, but I kept sitting there, staring at my old phone, asking myself, could I be wrong? Maybe the bank made a mistake. Maybe Clara mailed the money. Or maybe, in a rare moment of confusion, I truly forgot. No, I knew every detail, every small gift I'd ever received. There were no letters, no envelopes, no money from Adrian. That night, I pulled out the blue ledger, the cobalt leather accounting book I've kept since my years as treasurer for the Church Women's Committee. I flipped through the pages, each line precise. $12 for blood pressure medicine, $24 for utilities, $10 for community dinners at St. Anselm's Mission. Every expense recorded neatly. No mention of any transfer from Adrian Ellison. Nothing. The next morning, I went to Montecito Trust and Bank, where I still keep a small savings account. I sat across from a young teller named Noelani Kim and handed her my passbook. Please check if there have been any transfers from Adrian Ellison. He says he sent me $2.4 million every month for the past 8 months. Noelani looked surprised, typed a few lines, then gently shook her head. I'm sorry, Mrs. Ellison. There's nothing. The only activity was $1.35 in interest back in February. I nodded, thanked her, and stood. Outside, the Santa Barbara morning wind carried the smell of salt through my gray hair. I stood on the State Street sidewalk, feeling as if a stone had dropped straight through my chest. No transfers, no envelopes, no letters, nothing. For 8 months I'd clipped coupons from the local paper, bought canned soup instead of fresh vegetables, and whispered thanks each time the mission delivered food. I was used to eating alone, counting change before heading to the store. But never, not once, did I imagine that behind my son's silence lay a lie. I went home, set my purse down, and sat motionless. In the living room, the tide clock ticked like breath, its hand moving a notch at a time, as if whispering, The truth is coming. That afternoon, I went to St. Anselm's Mission as usual. Father Miguel Alvarez, who's known me for over 20 years, saw me sitting quietly in the back pew after Mass. He walked over, his voice kind. "Mrs. Ellison, are you all right? You look tired today." I smiled faintly, hiding my trembling hands. "I'm just trying to understand why my son's letters never arrive." Father Miguel placed a hand on my shoulder. "God has his ways of bringing truth to light. Don't lose faith." I nodded, but inside, faith wasn't enough anymore. I needed action. That night, I opened to the first page of the Blue Ledger, Adrian's gift on my 60th birthday. Instead of a prayer, I wrote, "If they're lying, I'll make the truth speak through the law." I pressed the pen hard into the paper. Under the lamp, the words glowed like a vow. From that day forward, I began documenting everything. Every time Clara visited, I noted the date, time, and her exact words. Octa 9, the money's been sent. Maybe the bank is delayed. No envelope, no proof. Octic 11, called. Said she was busy with a charity event, restaurant music in the background. Octi 13, dropped by in a rush, left scented candles. Said, "Don't worry, Mother." Nothing else. Line by line, I recorded it all. No anger, no hatred. Just the precision of someone who spent a lifetime balancing numbers, knowing they never lie. In the weeks that followed, Clara kept visiting, always flawless. Couture dresses, expensive handbags, shimmering heels. Each time she brought a small gift, flowers, cookies, sometimes candles, but never an envelope with money. One afternoon, while I was watering the seagrass pot by the porch, a silver Bentley Bentayga slid into the drive. Clara stepped out, radiant as ever, holding a spray of white orchids. "I brought you flowers to help you relax," she said sweetly. "Stress isn't good for the memory." I set the watering can down and wiped my hands on my apron. "My memory is just fine, Clara. Fine enough to remember the last time you brought me money was never." Her face twitched, then she quickly recovered with a bright smile. "Oh, Mother, you must be mistaken. I've sent it. Your bank must be at fault." I smiled and began arranging the flowers in a glass jar of sea glass. "Maybe, but I already asked the bank. They said nothing's come through in 8 months." Silence. Even the gulls seemed to hold their breath. Clara fussed with her pearl necklace. "I'll double-check," she said quickly, then hurried back to the car, leaving a ribbon of expensive perfume behind. I watched the Bentley disappear, a mix of bitterness and clarity rising in my chest. She had lied, and now she knew that I knew. That night I wrote, "Clara, October 13. Lied, nervous, left early." Each line felt like a hammer striking the hurt inside me. I was no longer the frail mother praying in silence. I was Ruth Ellison, a woman who had survived loss, uncertainty, and empty promises. And I would survive again to reclaim the truth. In the days that followed, I called Adrian's private banking, just pretending to ask about family gift transfers. They couldn't share details, but a kind employee hinted, if funds were transferred, they'd have to land in an account under your name. If you never received them, someone may have used a different account with your name. The word sent a chill down my spine. Another account bearing my name, but not mine. I closed the book and exhaled. I knew what I was up against. Clara was smart, charming, manipulative, capable of bending her husband's will. But I'd kept books for 3 companies. I'd managed thousands of dollars without losing a cent. If someone dared forge my name, I would find them. That night, I reread every note I'd written. The lamplight shone over my aging but steady script. Between the lines, I could almost see Edward's face. He used to say, "Ruth, if someone underestimates you, don't shout. Let them hear the sound of the truth." I closed the ledger, feeling a strange calm. The next morning, I went back to the mission, carrying a small envelope filled with copies of my notes. I handed it to Father Miguel and said softly, "Father, If one day I can't make it to Mass, please keep this safe for me." He looked worried. "Ruth, what are you doing?" I smiled gently but firmly. "I'm just preparing for the truth to be heard." As I walked home, my heart felt lighter, as if an invisible weight had lifted. I knew the road ahead would be long. There would be tears, pain, and betrayal. But I wasn't afraid anymore. I would take back each $2.4 million they siphoned, month after month, and more than that, I would reclaim the respect they thought age had stolen from me. When the sun dropped behind Santa Barbara's palms, I sat on the porch, staring at a red horizon. In that golden light, I whispered, "Clara, you picked the wrong woman to fool. This old mother still has a few lessons left to teach you." I smiled thinly, closed the blue ledger, and wrote one last line at the bottom of the page. "The first step toward justice is memory." And in the Pacific dusk, I knew my fight had just begun. That morning, the sea air ran warmer than usual. The wind carried salt and dried kelp. I was trimming the beach daisies when I heard the low, smooth purr of an expensive engine drawing near. The crunch of tires on gravel tightened my chest. A brand-new silver Bentley stopped at the gate, its paint so polished I had to squint. The door opened and Clara stepped out, as if she'd just walked off a magazine page, a cream linen dress, oversized sunglasses, mirror-bright heels. In her right hand, a large gift basket tied with a cobalt ribbon. She smiled, her voice sweet with a layer of steel. "Mother, I brought you a little something. Adrian's been in meetings all morning, so I came in his place." I wiped my hands on my apron and watched her climb the steps. "How thoughtful. You two must be very busy," I said softly, without smiling. Her gaze drifted across the garden. "Oh my, your garden is as beautiful as ever. I don't know how you manage it all by yourself." "With these hands and a little patience," I replied, tucking the shears into the soil. A moment later, she set the basket on the porch table. Fancy cookies, a jar of orange marmalade, a small bottle of wine, all neatly wrapped, expensive, pretty, and empty. I sat in the wooden chair, poured 2 cups from the turquoise pot, and looked her straight in the eye. "Clara, let me ask you something. Where's this month's money? The $2.4 million you said you'd bring over?" For a split second, her smile froze, barely noticeable, like a passing cloud. Then she laughed, a thin sound like glass tapping glass. "Oh, Mother, I must have left it in the car." Her voice pitched slightly higher as she fidgeted with the cup without drinking. I glanced toward the drive, where the Bentley gleamed in the sun. The reflection along the hood traced every smooth curve. Temporary plates, clearly a new purchase. I smiled slowly. "Nice car, Clara. Must have cost quite a bit." She shrugged, a brittle laugh. "Oh, not really, Mother. Just an upgrade for convenience. Professional image, you know." "Of course," I said calmly. "A new car for work, and old envelopes that keep getting left in the car. How odd." Her face stiffened for half a second before she forced another smile. "Oh, you don't trust me anymore. Next time I'll bring the bank receipt. All right?" I didn't reply. We sat there quietly. The far-off surf hummed where summer's cicadas used to be. Clara stood first, pretending to check her watch. "I have to run. Client meeting. But don't worry, I'll remind Adrian to resend it through the bank. I'm sorry for any small mix-up." I nodded. "All right, go on then. Oh, and this time, don't forget the envelope in your car." She paused a beat, smiling thinly, a mix of annoyance and caution. "You're very sharp, Mother," she said, then turned to leave. I watched her walk away, the sound of her heels on the wooden steps steady and cold, like a tide clock counting down. The car door slammed, the engine turned over, and the Bentley slipped off down the road, leaving a streak of blinding sunlight behind. When the sound faded, I sat there, fingers laced, a weight pressing on my chest. I had no doubt left. I knew. I stood and went inside. Each step across the wood floor echoed like a heartbeat in my mind. I opened the drawer, took out the blue ledger, and wrote, "Octi 9. Clara came alone with a gift basket. Claimed she left the money in the car. Brand new Bentley. No proof. Voice unsteady. avoided eye contact. I set the pen down and drew a deep breath. My hand trembled, but my resolve did not. That afternoon, I walked to the public phone booth on State Street. I didn't want to call from home, not when I suspected Clara might be watching. I dialed Ellison Meridian Capital and kept my voice polite and steady. "Hello, this is Ruth Ellison, mother of Adrian Ellison. I'd like to speak with someone in accounting. It's a personal matter." After a brief hold, a middle-aged woman answered. "This is Hannah Cho, senior accountant. Mrs. Ellison, how can I help you?" I gripped the receiver, keeping my tone even. "Thank you, Hannah. I just need to confirm one small thing. My son said his company has been deducting $4 million each month from his personal account to send to me. Is that correct?" A short pause. Then Hannah spoke, careful and measured. "Mrs. Ellison, I can't disclose personal financial details, but let me check. Yes, I recall automated transfers on the same day each month for that exact amount. It appears the money was sent, but I'm not sure to whom." "To whom?" I repeated. "It wasn't sent to me." I'm not certain, ma'am. The recipient's name matches yours, but the account number is different. I assumed it was yours." A chill slid down my spine. I forced my voice to stay level. "Thank you, Hannah. That's all I needed for now." I hung up and stood motionless in the booth. My heart raced, but my mind was clear as glass. There it was, the truth. Someone had created a fake sub-account under my name, and only one person was close enough to pull that off: Clara. On the walk home, my shadow stretched long across the pavement. The sea wind carried salt and damp sand. I thought of Clara's hands, long, manicured fingers, diamond rings lifting designer handbags. No calluses, no trace of real work. That night I skipped dinner. I brewed a cup of peppermint tea and sat at the kitchen table under the warm yellow light. The house was so quiet I could hear the mission bell far off, braided into the sound of waves. I opened a fresh page and wrote, "Octa 9, Clara visited, elegant, pretending to care. New car, old lie. Called Adrian's company, confirmed, the money still transfers, but not to my account. Tomorrow, the truth begins to surface." I put the pen down and closed the ledger. The small lamp threw my reflection onto the window. A silver-haired woman, slight, but with eyes that still burned. I knew that starting tomorrow, I wouldn't be a waiting mother anymore. I would be a seeker of justice. I turned off the light and stepped onto the porch. Night wind carried the smell of salt and wet wood. In the corner of the yard, moonlight fell on the old wooden bench where Edward and I used to sit and talk. I touched its worn armrest and whispered, "Edward, if you were still here, you'd tell me to do what's right, wouldn't you?" The only answer was wind under the eaves, but I understood. It was an answer. I went back inside, locked the door, and stood quietly in front of the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't tired or defeated. She was Ruth Ellison, a mother who would no longer let anyone take her dignity. And I knew that when morning came, Clara's game would start to fall apart piece by piece. The next morning, while I was cutting a few stems of sea lavender to dry, a sudden, firm knock hit the door. Not the soft tap of a mail carrier or a neighbor. This was steady, deliberate. I wiped my hands on my apron and opened it. On the porch stood a tall, middle-aged man with graying hair, a charcoal suit. He smiled politely and gave a small nod. "Mrs. Ruth Ellison. I'm Graham Patel, CFO and Chief Accountant at Ellison Meridian Capital." I narrowed my eyes slightly. "You're Graham? I just spoke with Hannah Cho yesterday." He nodded. "Yes, Hannah briefed me. I thought you should know a few things." His voice was calm but serious, tinged with regret. I invited him in and poured a glass of water. Morning light slid through the window, catching the fine lines at his eyes, the look of a man who's seen more than he wished to. He set a leather briefcase on the table and opened it. Inside lay a thick folder, clipped and neatly ordered. Crisp rows of numbers, the language I've spoken for 35 years. He slid the folder toward me and spoke slowly. "These are copies of 8 transfers, each for $2.4 million to $19.2 million total. Recipient, A sub-account opened under the name Ruth Ellison. Control beneficiary, Clara Ellison. It felt like a bucket of ice water poured over me. My hands shook as I turned the pages. The papers were clear. Sender, Adrian Ellison. Recipient, sub-account controlled by Clara. Bank verified. Same date each month, the 15th. Steady as a tide clock. I looked up, my voice hoarse. Mr. Graham, who opened that account? He sighed, removed his glasses, and wiped them. Clara, the sub-account file includes a copy of your ID, I suspect a sophisticated forgery, plus an authorization bearing Adrian's signature. He likely didn't read the forms carefully. The system auto-registered it as your account, but control remained with Clara. I pressed a hand to my forehead. The room tilted. It wasn't just betrayal. It was humiliation. For 8 months, Clara had used my name, a mother's name, to siphon money from my own son. I asked quietly, "And Adrian? He didn't know?" Graham hesitated. "Honestly, I don't think so. He works hard, but he trusts his wife too much. He lets Clara handle most of the paperwork." He paused, then met my eyes. "And she's also been using the company card for personal expenses. Our reconciliation shows $1.1 million in 3 months. Gulfstream G280 charter. $320,000. Van Nuys Teterboro. Aspen Chalet, Peak. $180,000. Four Seasons, Bora Bora. $96,000. High Jewelry and Couture, LA, NY Soho. $220,000. Bentley Bentayga, down payment, $150,000, private wellness, Medispa, $54,000, PR dinners, stylists, concierge, $80,000. It's all in these exhibits, with reconciliation and a draft affidavit. The words Gulfstream, Aspen, Bora Bora rang in my head like a hammer striking steel. I looked out the window. The ocean light glanced off the wooden bench where Clara once sat sipping tea, saying, "Mother, Adrian's so busy. I handle everything for him." Now I knew everything meant every dollar. I turned back to Graham, my voice rough but firm. "Mr. Graham, if I want to expose this, will you help me?" He met my gaze, blue-gray, steady. "Mrs. Ellison, I believe in justice, and I believe in evidence. We need to prepare carefully, or Clara will twist the story and turn Adrian against you. She's not an easy opponent." I nodded. "I know. I've watched her do it, smiling while she lies." Graham gave a faint, rueful smile. "I'll help, but I'll need a few days to gather everything. Full transaction histories, written confirmation from the bank that the account isn't yours, and a reconciliation report. Once we're there, I'll coordinate with attorney Monica Reyes to file subpoenas if needed." I looked at him. In his eyes, I saw something I hadn't seen in anyone for a long time. Integrity. "Thank you, Mr. Graham," I said softly. "You have no idea what this means to me." He closed the folder and stood. "I'm just doing what's right. And, sadly, cases like yours happen more often than you'd think. Many people are betrayed by those closest to them." I nodded, my eyes landing on a driftwood frame along the wall. Adrian at 10, grinning beside Edward. I remember that day clearly, light drizzle, and Edward said, "Teach him to tell the difference between a good man and a smooth talker, Ruth. They often wear the same smile." Graham Patel left after that, and I was alone again with the stack of papers on the table. The door clicked shut, and the bungalow dropped back into silence. I stared at the thick folder, each line of transfer laid out, every line a piece of betrayal. I set everything carefully into a small metal box and slid it under the oak kitchen cabinet. When I turned the key, it felt like locking another door, the last door of my trust. Evening thinned out across the porch, late light brushing my gray hair. I poured tea from the turquoise ceramic set, sat at the kitchen table, and looked through the window toward the Pacific. Outside was calm, but inside me, a quiet fire burned. I took out the blue ledger, opened to a fresh page, and wrote slowly but firm. Oct. 11. Mr. Graham came with records of 8 transfers. $2. 4M per month, into a sub-account opened under the name Ruth Ellison, but control beneficiary is Clara Ellison. Clara also used the company card for luxury spending, or 1.1M, 3 months. Adrian was deceived. Not just my money, but his. I have an ally. The fight begins. I set the pen down and looked at the window. The sky burned red, a streak of fire slashing the clouds. In a low, steady voice, I said, "Clara, you forgot I worked accounting for 35 years. I can read lies and numbers, and this time the numbers will speak." I closed the ledger, feeling lighter. For the first time in months, I didn't feel alone. There was someone, a witness, willing to stand with me. That night, I slept better than usual. The bells of St. Anselm's Mission, far away, sounded like a steady count of hope. In my dream, I saw Graham standing in white light, holding up the file, Clara backing away, face draining as each secret peeled back. When I woke, I knew I was no longer a victim. I was the one setting the truth in motion. 3 days later, with every fact lined up in my head like rows on a balance sheet, I decided to act. I called Adrian. His voice was warm, a little tired. "Mom, I'm sorry. Work's been crazy. Clara says she's been stopping by regularly, right?" I smiled and kept my tone light. "She has, son. Clara is thoughtful. I'm thinking of inviting you both to dinner this Sunday. It's been a while since we had a proper meal." Adrian agreed happily, never sensing the thin wire hidden in that invitation. I spent the morning preparing, not because I wanted a perfect dinner, but because I wanted it to feel completely ordinary. Honey-roasted chicken, mashed potatoes, apple walnut salad, and apple pie. Adrian's childhood favorites. I polished Edward's old silverware and set the table with soft candlelight. Everything arranged carefully, warm, sincere, just enough to make a liar loosen her guard. When the tide clock on the porch ticked past the mark, I heard a familiar engine at the gate. A silver Bentley slid into the drive. Clara stepped out first, flawless as ever, soft waves in her hair, a jade silk dress, a trace of Dior. Adrian followed with a bouquet of white lilies. "Mom, you look amazing." He grinned, setting the flowers on the table. "Son, I'm better than ever, by God's grace. And because of you two." Clara smiled, her mouth curving with that familiar smugness. I recognized the look of someone who thinks she holds every string. I poured wine and tea, chatted about the weather, the mission bells, the jars of sea glass lined on the shelf. Everything flowed as if no shadow of doubt had ever passed through this house. I let the room warm up, enough to let her relax. When the main course was served, I looked up and smiled. "I truly appreciate you both, especially for this month's amount." Clara paused half a beat, then flashed a bright smile and sipped her wine. "Oh, Mother, please, no formality. I'm just doing what I should." I nodded, pretending to be shy. "I just replaced the heater. The Santa Barbara winds come early. Thanks to that money, I feel at ease." Clara's smile widened, triumphant. She tilted her head toward Adrian as if to say, "See? Everything's fine." I watched her, then asked casually, like it was nothing at all, "Oh, Clara, I'm just curious. What day do you usually send it?" She didn't brace herself. She answered on reflex. "The 10th of every month, Mother." I nodded slightly. Before I could speak, Adrian frowned. "Wait, not the 10th, honey. I set the auto transfer for the 15th. The room went still. Do you hear that silence? The moment a liar steps right into her own trap? If it were you, would you stay quiet as I did, or call it out on the spot? Tell me in the comments. I think most of us have lived through at least one dinner that shattered like that. The air fell into a cold hush. I smiled gently and set my fork down. "Perfect. I'll stop by Montecito Trust and Bank on the 15th, just to make sure the system isn't acting up." Clara gave a brittle laugh, trying to cover her worry. "Oh, you're so careful, Mother. Don't worry. I've been sending it regularly." Adrian nodded, but his eyes had shifted. He turned to his wife, about to say something, but she quickly changed the subject to work and weather. I sat quietly, clean and calm, the calm of someone who knows she's set the exact right trap. Dessert was apple pie, cinnamon threading through the room. Adrian praised it. Clara barely touched hers, glancing at her watch as if she couldn't wait to leave. I knew she was struggling to breathe in a room she thought she controlled. At the door, I said softly, "Thank you both for coming. I haven't laughed this much in a long time. Remember, I'll check the account on the 15th, just to make sure the bank isn't having issues." Clara forced a smile. "Yes, Mother, I'm sure there won't be any problem." Adrian kissed my cheek, gentle as always. But in his eyes I saw a thin, new line of doubt. When the Bentley rolled away, I stood in the doorway, watching the taillights fade. Night wind pushed across the yard, rattling the wooden door. I went back in and closed it softly. What I felt wasn't triumph, it was release. I went straight to the little work corner off the kitchen and turned on the computer. The glow fell across the driftwood frame. Edward's kind smile felt like a quiet push forward. I opened my email and wrote to the only two people I trusted now, Graham Patel, chief accountant, and Monica Reyes, an old friend, a fraud attorney. I typed slowly, heartbeat steady, eyes clear. Subject: It's time to begin. Graham, Monica, everything's ready. I just confirmed Clara lied about the transfer date. They think I believe them, but they contradicted each other right to my face. Please start scrubbing all transactions and prepare the comparison file. By the 15th, I want every piece of evidence lined up. It's time for her to self-destruct. Ruth. I reread the last line and smiled faintly. There was something about self-destruct that made me feel lighter. Not from revenge, but because justice would arrive by the liar's own hand. I hit send and leaned back. Outside, the night wind lifted the curtains, carrying salt and damp wood. I closed my eyes and listened to the mission bell and the tide clock, as if counting down to the 15th, the day the truth would start to crack. 2 days later, Graham replied, short, like him. Bank confirmation in hand. Sub-account under your name was opened by Clara with forged documents. They'll release data once we have subpoenas. Monica will handle everything on track. G. I read it and felt my chest tighten, then ease, like hearing an old iron gate swing open. I am not cruel. I just want the truth spoken so Adrian can wake up. I want him to understand. Trust is not a blank check for someone to drain until nothing is left. That night, I added a line to the blue ledger, a small ritual. Oct 13, dinner went perfectly. Clara exposed herself. Adrian began to doubt. Oct 15, bank check. Justice is coming, soft as sea wind. I blew out the candle. Moonlight filtered through the window. I looked in the mirror, a silver-haired woman, small but bright-eyed, and whispered to myself, or maybe to Edward, "Do you see? She thinks she's clever, but her own mouth tightened the noose. All I have to do is stay quiet and wait for the 15th. I smiled, small, warm enough to fill the room. The trap was set, and the prey was walking in. The next morning, the Santa Barbara sky was startlingly clear. I sat by the window with a hot cup of tea from the turquoise pot, calm in a way that surprised me. Today was the day Graham Patel had promised to send everything. In just a few hours, every lie would take shape in black ink on white paper. Around 8 o'clock, the phone rang. Mrs. Ruth Ellison, his voice steady and low. It's all done. I've just sent you the full statements with reconciliation and an affidavit. Monica Reyes reviewed them. She says with your ledger signatures, we can open a case. I thanked him softly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. I never imagined that at my age I would need a CFO and a fraud attorney just to protect what my son set aside for me. 15 minutes later, the mail carrier knocked. A cobalt portfolio, sealed and embossed. Confidential. Ellison Meridian Records. I set it on the table and stared for a long moment before opening it. Inside were dozens of clean printouts. 8 transfers, each for $2.4 million, $19.2 million total. Sender, Adrian Ellison. Recipient, the name Ruth Ellison. But the sub-account was controlled by Clara Ellison. Bold lines, even spacing on bank letterhead. I read them twice and still felt disbelief, as if the numbers were laughing at my trust. At the end, a blue ink note from Graham. Clara used personal accounts. Beyond the 8 transfers, 3 months of spending total, 1.11 M. Gulfstream G280 Charter, 320K. Aspen Chalet, Peak, 180K. Four Seasons Bora Bora, 96K. High Jewelry and Couture, LA NYR Soho, 220K. Bentley Bentayga, down payment 150K. Private Wellness Medispa, 54K. PR dinner/stylists, concierge, 80K. Morning light came through the window and laid a pale gold over the pages, the color of truth. I turned to the next sheet. Each receipt was a small knife. I remembered Clara walking into my house, perfumed and polished, saying, "Mother, I just want you to know I care for you like my own." Now I understood care meant draining every dollar under my name. I drew a deep breath and reached for the blue ledger, my justice journal. Under the date, I wrote carefully. Oct 15, received Graham's file. 8 Act 2.4 M, all flowing to Clara. Charter, Aspen, Bora Bora, Bentley, Medispa, 1.1 M, 3 months. The price of trust. My hand trembled, not from fear, but because I was about to reclaim dignity stolen from me. That afternoon, Monica called. Her voice was firm and precise, the tone of someone seasoned by courtrooms. "Ruth, everything is solid. This is a textbook elder financial exploitation case. We can go civil or recommend criminal." I answered quietly, "Not yet. Adrian needs to see it with his own eyes. Only then will justice mean something." Monica paused, then said slowly, "You're right. Nothing hurts more than a son realizing his wife exploited his mother." I nodded. "I'll ask Father Miguel Alvarez to help stage a small charity dinner, a pretext so they'll come." At dusk, I drove to St. Anselm's Mission. Red light washed over the old stone steps. Father Miguel was lining up chairs in the hall. After I explained the plan, he thought for a moment, then smiled gently. "Sometimes God doesn't need thunder to reveal sin, Ruth. He only needs the small light of truth." I squeezed his hand in thanks. "I just want Adrian to see that light, not for revenge, but so he stops being blind." On the way home, I stopped at the corner store for a few supplies. Outside looked peaceful, with no hint that in just days, Clara's world would fall in on itself. That night at home, I spread Graham's file across the dining table, every statement, every invoice, every piece of proof. I marked the large withdrawals in red, then slipped everything into a cobalt portfolio embossed Senior Relief Fund donation. On the cover I wrote, neat and even, donation materials. Only I knew there wasn't a single donation inside, just guilt and deceit. I stared at the papers for a long time. My heart beat hard after months of numbness. For so long, I'd thought I was only a widow who needed care. But looking at those numbers, I realized I was never weak. I had only been persuaded to believe it. Around 8 that evening, the phone rang again. "Graham, Monica has everything ready in case you decide to file, but I respect your timing. Waiting for the right moment is wise. Clara will expose herself soon enough." I smiled. "Thank you, Graham. You've done more than an accountant's job. You've helped me believe in justice again." I hung up and locked the cobalt portfolio in the cabinet beneath the driftwood frame. On the drawer above, I left a small note. "This is evidence not only of fraud, but of a mother who refuses to stay silent." The soft click of the lock sounded final, like a promise kept. That night, I wrote one short line into the blue ledger. Graham gathered full statements, Charter, Aspen, Bora Bora, Bentley. Monica confirms enough for an elder financial abuse case. But we won't file yet. Adrian must see first. Father Miguel will help stage the faux charity dinner. Cobalt portfolio at the center of the table. My hands tremble not from fear, but because dignity is coming home. Tonight, I'll sleep in peace. Sunday evening, Santa Barbara's late sun poured into the yard, turning jars of sea glass and shells on the sill into bands of blue light. In the kitchen, a pot of red wine beef stew simmered, Adrian's childhood favorite. I laid a white tablecloth, set the old porcelain, and 3 small wine glasses. In the center, the cobalt portfolio sat neatly, as if an invisible guest waiting to be acknowledged. At 7, I heard a car at the gate. Adrian and Clara arrived. He wore a white shirt, she, as always, old money chic, a pale pink silk dress, new heels, a gleaming string of pearls. "Mom!" Adrian hugged me tight. "I miss this smell, the smell of home." I smiled, resting a hand on his shoulder. "I made it for you, like old times." Clara stood behind him, smile polished. "Oh, how cozy. You always make dinner feel special, Mother." "Yes," I said softly. "Tonight will be very special." 15 minutes later, Father Miguel arrived with a large white envelope. "Sorry I'm late," he said. "Here are the donation papers you asked me to bring." I took it, nodded thanks, and had him sit. Clara tilted her head, voice syrupy. "Oh, so this is a real charity dinner? I thought you were joking, Mother." I poured wine for everyone, smiling gently. "Yes, a dinner to talk about trust, sharing, and honesty." Clara stiffened a beat, then smoothed her smile. Adrian kept smiling, unaware of the undertow beneath the table. When we were settled, I opened the cobalt portfolio. The papers inside were arranged without a flaw, Graham's touch in every line. I pulled the first sheet and spread it on the table. "Son," I said slowly, "this is the list of donations to me over the past 8 months. I think you should look." Adrian frowned. "Donations?" "I said an auto transfer for you every month." I slid the statement toward him. The bold print was unmistakable. Sub-account Ruth Ellison. Control Clara Ellison. Amount $2.4 million. Date the 15th of each month. Adrian went silent. His eyes dropped to the page, shifting from confusion to shock. Clara jumped in, voice high and sweet. "Oh, that must be some mix-up, Mother. You've been getting the money, right? Banks mess up recipient names all the time." I kept my voice calm. "Do they also mess up G280 Charter 320K, Aspen 180K, Bora Bora 96K, Bentley down payment 150K? All charged to whose card and whose sub-account? Bank error too?" Her face hardened, then she forced a smile. "Maybe someone used my name by accident." Before she could finish, a firm male voice came from the doorway. "No one used your name by accident, ma'am. I prepared those records." Everyone turned. Graham stood there with another stack of printouts. I had invited him, but told no one. Clara's face went pale. Adrian looked confused. "Who are you?" "Graham Patel," he answered, crisp. "CFO, Ellison Meridian Capital, and the person Mrs. Ruth authorized to reconcile. 8 transfers of $2. $4 million. None of them reached her real account." I rose and faced Clara. "Graham can verify every amount, every signature, every transaction." Adrian turned to his wife, his voice fraying. "Clara, what is this?" She grabbed his hand, eyes wet. I only borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. I didn't want to upset your mother." I sighed softly. 8 months of borrowing, by forging bank documents and opening a sub-account under your mother-in-law's name. She broke into sobs, but they were desperate, not remorseful. Adrian pulled his hand away, eyes burning. "What did you do to my mother? I sent that money so she could live comfortably. You used it to fly charter, rent chalets, shop couture, buy a Bentley, and you lied to my face." Clara stepped back, color draining. "You don't understand. Adrian's palm slammed the table. Glass rattled. The room snapped to silence. Only Clara's ragged breathing and the thud of my heart in my chest. Father Miguel, who'd sat quietly the whole time, folded his hands. Sometimes God doesn't need to punish the guilty. He simply lets them see their reflection. I sat and looked at Clara, my voice calm. I didn't need the money. I needed respect. A thing you took, not only from me, but from your husband." She sobbed, stammering, "Mother, I'm sorry. I only wanted to help Adrian manage things better. I didn't mean—" I shook my head. "Stop lying. You didn't manage. You stole." Graham stepped forward and set the final file in front of Adrian. "Originals, forged authorizations, bank records, invoices. Keep them. You'll need them to protect what's yours." Adrian said nothing. He stared at the numbers, then looked up. In Adrian's eyes were pain, shame, and the first spark of awakening. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I was a fool to trust her." I set a hand on his shoulder. "No, son. The mistake isn't in trusting. It's in those who betray it." Clara burst into ragged sobs, her eyes darting for an exit. "I've had enough." She shot to her feet. "If you want to believe her, go ahead." She snatched up her purse. Her heels cracked against the wood floor, each step sounding like a period at the end of a sentence. The door slammed. Silence fell. No more excuses, only the fading scent of beef stew and the heavy presence of truth. Graham Patel gave a small nod, gathering the statements and reconciliation. Father Miguel touched my shoulder. "You've done what not every mother has the courage to do, Ruth." I smiled faintly. This victory brought no joy, only release. I cleared the table, plates half-eaten, wine glasses ringed. The chair Clara had just left still faintly warm. I gathered the scattered pages and slid them into the cobalt portfolio sitting at the center of the table like a seal of truth. Outside, wind off the Pacific washed across the porch. The tide clock on the wall nudged a half mark, its needle shifting from half-tide toward flood. I lifted my eyes to a sliver of moon. Its light caught the portfolio's cover in a deep, dark blue. The next morning, Monica Reyes texted, "Complaint and affidavit ready. File now?" I replied, "Do what needs to be done." By noon, Santa Barbara County Superior Court sent a notice. October 17, preliminary hearing. Everything arrived fast, decisive, like the mission bell striking the hour. I opened the blue ledger. Octi 15, dinner. Clara says the 10th. Adrian corrects to the 15th. Graham confirms 8 transfers of 2.4 M massage month. Total 19.2 M. Exhibits G280, 320K. Aspen 180K, Bora Bora 96K, Bentley 150K, Couture and Medispa, PR Services 1.1 M, 3 months, 3-way proof, closed. I closed the book. The truth now had shape and sound. Hearing day. The sky was pewter gray, the sea wind sharp with salt. The courthouse hallway shone with polished stone, faintly scented with coffee and fresh paper. Monica strode beside me, minimalist coat, clear eyes. "You okay?" "I'm okay. I just wish it didn't have to come to this." In the courtroom, Clara sat at the defense table, black suit, hair in a tight bun, face pale but eyes composed with mirror-taut calm. Beside her, a young attorney, hired in a hurry by the look of him. Adrian sat alone in the gallery, silent. The judge entered. Gavel. "The court is convened to consider a case of elder financial exploitation." Monica rose, voice clear and even. For 8 consecutive months, the defendant, Clara Ellison, opened a sub-account under the falsely represented name Ruth Ellison and diverted $2.4 million per month from Adrian Ellison, $19.2 million total, so that none of it reached Mrs. Ruth's true account. Concurrently, she incurred approximately $1 million 3 months of personal spending on a company card, Gulfstream G280 Charter, 320K, Van Nuys, Teterboro, Aspen Chalet, Peak, 180K, Four Seasons, Bora Bora, 96K, High Jewelry and Couture, 220K, Bentley Bentayga, down payment 150K, Medispa 54K, PR stylists / concierge 80K. Defense counsel sprang up. "This is a misunderstanding about household finances. Mrs. Ruth is elderly. She may have misremembered." The word cut like a dull blade. Monica didn't even lift an eyebrow. "Mrs. Ruth's memory is sharp enough to log 10, 09, 10, 11, 10, 13, 10, 15, 10, 17 in the blue ledger, dates, times, and the defendant's exact words, left the envelope in the car, and the 10th. Every line matches the bank data. If this is memory loss, it's the most precise case I've ever seen. A ripple of whispers passed through the room. Graham Patel took the stand. He adjusted his tie. I'm CFO of Ellison Meridian Capital. I confirm the statements, reconciliation, and affidavit are authentic. The auto transfers occurred on the 15th each month from Adrian's personal account. The sub-account labeled Ruth Ellison is not Mrs. Ruth's true account. Control belonged to Clara. Noelani Kim, teller at Montecito Trust and Bank, confirmed no deposits entered the true account titled Ruth Ellison for 8 months. The judge flipped pages, frowning at the line reading Bentley down payment. The gavel tapped once. Clara lifted her head, voice shaking. I only borrowed it. I was going to pay it back. I didn't. Monica set the exhibits down lightly. The defendant did not borrow. The defendant forged. The courtroom fell quiet. The hush before rain. The ruling came crisp and cold. Defendant Clara Ellison shall repay $19.2 million plus interest and court costs to Mrs. Ruth Ellison. Defendant is barred from managing or accessing any accounts belonging to Adrian Ellison for 5 years. Defendant must complete a 12-month financial ethics and rehabilitation program. Court adjourned. 3 blows of the gavel, dry and straight, like a steel door closing. Clara collapsed into her chair. Adrian looked at her with empty eyes, then turned away. My heart ached dully. Justice is a double-edged blade. It cuts the chains of deceit and the fragile threads of a family. That afternoon, Santa Barbara broke into rain. On the courthouse steps, heavy drops burst into smaller beads. I stood beneath the awning, letting the cold in, and felt lighter inside. No applause, no cheers, only the quiet peace of a circle closed. A few days later, the bank confirmed restitution had posted to my true account. The number flashed, $19.2 million plus interest, and tasted of nothing sweet. I opened the window, let the salt air spill into the oak kitchen, watched the sea glass glow in the rain. If those dollars had once been tools of deceit, then from now on they would do some good. I replaced the roof, installed a new heater, then with Monica and Father Miguel, registered the Grace Tides Foundation, a fund to support seniors exploited financially. Our first office was the basement of St. Anselm's Mission, 3 desks, an old printer, and a carved wooden sign, bringing the truth back to shore. The cobalt portfolio sat at the center of the meeting table as a reminder, justice travels on paperwork, slow but sure. Each week, Father Miguel and I met trembling faces, a grandmother forced by her daughter to sign away her house, a 70-year-old whose grandson drained his pension, an 80-year-old widow whose signature was forged for an emergency loan. I opened a separate blue ledger for the foundation, date, time, initials, and a last box always left empty for the line, safe now. One rainy night, the mission bell struck 8. I was pouring tea from the turquoise pot when Adrian appeared on the porch, jacket soaked, eyes rimmed red. I opened the door. Yeah. Wind carried the smell of kelp and wet wood through the bungalow. Am I disturbing you, Mom? Perfect timing. The tea just finished steeping. We sat at the kitchen table. The tide clock drifted toward ebb. Adrian set the Bentley keys on the table like a confession. Mom, I let everything go too far. I squeezed his hand. You stopped. That's what matters. He nodded, exhaled. I want to contribute to the foundation, not to buy forgiveness, but because I understand now the truth needs funding to reach its destination. I smiled. We'll let the numbers speak. In winter, Santa Barbara County hosted a ceremony honoring community initiatives after abuse cases. The courthouse hall glowed warm gold. They invited me to speak. Graham stood behind me. Monica and Father Miguel sat in the front row. I didn't speak long, only about a blue-backed ledger, a cobalt portfolio, and a mission bell that keeps steady time, things that don't know how to lie. When I stepped down, Adrian hugged me hard. Beyond the glass, the sea lay dark, the low tide pulling back to reveal clean bands of sand. That night at home, I set Edward's driftwood frame beside the blue ledger. I wrote the final line of the milestone. Octi 17, Judgment. Restitution 19.2 M, plus interest and fees. 5-year bar. 12-month rehab. Grace tides take shape. Rain night reunion. Commendation. I closed the book. The mission bell outside struck 9. The tide clock rested at low and would rise again. I blew out the lamp, in the dark. Every story was a wound, and I'd learned how to listen without tears. I simply held their hands, poured tea from the turquoise ceramic set, and told them what I had lived. The truth doesn't save you instantly, but it always arrives on time. Monica Reyes worked tirelessly, reaching out to legal organizations, applying for grants, training volunteers. I handled what we called the heart work, listening, writing letters, comforting, and recording their journeys in the Foundation's new blue ledger, a cobalt-backed notebook set beside a jar of sea glass on the table. One afternoon, while I was straightening a stack of files in the basement of St. Anselm's Mission, Father Miguel said softly, "Ruth, isn't it strange? Your pain has become light for others." I smiled. Maybe that's how God rewrites the ending for those who were once betrayed. As Grace Tide's foundation grew, reporters started to show up. They wanted to interview the mother who sued her old money chic daughter-in-law. Some invited me on television. A newspaper offered a book deal. I turned them all down. I didn't want to become a story for people to gossip about. I wanted peace. Sometimes silence is the only way to keep a wound from bleeding again, I told Monica. She nodded. Justice can be public, but healing has to be private. At night, I kept a new ritual. I lit a small candle on the windowsill facing the Pacific. Its gentle flame washed over the driftwood frame of Adrian as a boy. I whispered, "Son, I'm not angry. I just hope you learn something from this pain." The flame trembled like a thin golden thread. I touched the cold glass and realized forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing not to let the wound define the rest of your life. Sometimes Father Miguel asked, "Have you truly forgiven her?" I think so, because I no longer want her to suffer. But forget? No. The betrayed can forgive, but never forget. He smiled. You're still the strong Ruth, I know. On a crisp autumn morning, I was watering the lavender on the bungalow porch when Monica arrived with a thick envelope. We just received funding from the California Elder Justice Fund. They want a long-term partnership. I looked at the raised seal, feeling both proud and humbled. Who would have thought the woman who once lived off church food baskets was now helping others reclaim their dignity? But on very quiet nights, the wind at the window sometimes sounded like my son calling. I knew Adrian wasn't ready yet. Maybe he was learning how to forgive himself. I didn't blame him. I waited. Not because I needed him, but because I needed the truth to come full circle. Motherhood, trust, and a love still standing after betrayal. One day when he knocked, I would still open the door. Not because I had forgotten, but because I had learned how to love without breaking myself again. That night, rain fell steady from dusk to midnight. Wind battered the glass, making the tide clock on the wall quiver, its needles slipping toward ebb. The yellow lamp in the living room reflected on the wet pane like fragments of memories I'd been sorting for months. I was reviewing donation files for next week's meeting when I heard a knock, soft but insistent, carrying the storm's chill. It was past 10. At my age, few people knock that late. Unless... I turned the lock. Wind rushed in, rain stung my wrist. Adrian stood there, soaked through, hair plastered to his forehead, eyes red. Time stopped. "Mom," his voice broke. "Mom, I'm sorry. I've been so stupid." He stepped inside and collapsed to his knees. A raw, wrenching sob tore free, like a pin pulled from something rusted shut. I knelt beside him, set a hand on his shoulder. "Get up, son. Everyone stumbles. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's saving yourself." He lifted his head, tears mixing with rain. "I don't deserve your forgiveness. I doubted you. I let her manipulate me. I stayed silent while you suffered. Mom, I've lost everything." I guided him to the chair and wrapped a towel around his hair the way I did when he was small. Every motion was slow and gentle, afraid to jar the fragile moment of return. "I don't need your apology," I said quietly. "I just need you to remember, the truth is never late. It only waits until we're brave enough to face it." He stared at the fire snapping in the hearth. Outside, rain drummed on the glass like the belated heartbeat of a soul waking up. After a while, Adrian whispered, "Clara's gone. She drained what was left and disappeared. She left one message. You trusted the wrong person." I closed my eyes. No anger, no surprise, just a quiet sadness, like a low-tide sea. I took his hand, warm and firm. "No, son. You just recognized the truth too late. Trust may be betrayed, but it's still what separates us from those who deceive." He rested his head on my shoulder like a child who had finally found his way home. "I lost everything, my career, my money, my dignity." I smoothed his hair. "No, you didn't. Tonight you found something greater, a heart that knows how to admit it's wrong and stand again." The rain went on. I brewed ginger tea in the turquoise pot. Steam rose, braided with the scent of wood smoke, warming the oak kitchen. "I don't understand how you can stay so calm," he said. "Because I know justice isn't about making someone pay. It's about restoring balance. You see, Clara reaped exactly what she sowed." He nodded, eyes following the flames. "I only have you left now, Mom." "No," I said. "You still have yourself. And what you choose from this moment on will decide whether you truly stand again." He was quiet for a long beat, then suddenly, "Mom, can I help at the foundation? I want to do something that matters. Maybe start this weekend." I looked at him. His eyes were so sincere I had to swallow hard. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. I want to relearn how to use money to heal instead of to harm." I nodded. "Come Saturday. Father Miguel will be glad." So, from that day on, Adrian came to Grace Tides every weekend. He drove in early with coffee for everyone, sat beside me reconciling spreadsheets and drafting thank you letters to donors. Some days he helped Father Miguel move chairs. On others, he went with Monica to meet seniors and take statements. People say time heals everything. For me, it wasn't time. It was my son's transformation. One morning, Santa Barbara sunlight poured honey gold into the mission basement. I saw Adrian bent over a screen, fixing a reconciliation line by line. His brown hair glinted like sea salt. In that moment, I saw the little boy again, the one who once asked, "Mom, what does honesty mean?" I stood still. The mission bell outside struck the hour. The tide clock in the room clicked another notch. My heart filled with tenderness and gratitude, because the truth had ridden the full swell and found its way back to shore. "Adrian," I called softly. He looked up. "Yes?" "You've walked through your own pain, son," I smiled. "Not everyone has the courage to do that." He gave a small, honest smile, one I hadn't seen in a long time. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be drowning in guilt." I laid my hand on his shoulder, voice warm and steady. "I didn't save you, Adrian. You saved yourself." Outside, the first rain of the season brushed Santa Barbara. Sea wind slipped across the porch, carrying salt and the scent of wet leaves. Drops traveled long down the window pane and vanished. The door you knocked on that stormy night now stood open, no more wind slamming it, only the briny breath of the Pacific drifting in. In the quiet, I understood. No matter how life breaks, it always leaves a way back for those brave enough to return. When I watched my son smile in a sunlit kitchen, I knew the storm had passed. Peace had found its way back to the little wood house facing the sea. On a mild autumn morning, thin sunlight poured through the window. I sat at the table with a blank page. From the porch came the smell of dried kelp and wildflowers along the sand. The turquoise pot breathed soft warmth. I lifted my pen. The ink moved like breath, and the first lines appeared. Clara, thank you. Because of you, I learned the true value of honesty and the strength of self-respect. I paused, watching the ink feather lightly in the early light. No anger, only calm. I continued, if not for you, I might still believe truth is obvious and kindness always repays kindness. You taught me otherwise. Truth matters only when we're brave enough to defend it. You took my money, but in return, you gave me something money can't buy: freedom. I folded the letter and set it in a small wooden box, among old photographs and a slip of paper Edward once wrote. Ruth, truth doesn't need to be shouted, it only needs to be lived. The lid closed with a soft click, like a chapter quietly ending. In the months that followed, Grace Tide's foundation grew faster than I'd imagined. Our first office sat in the basement of St. Anselm's Mission, 3 desks, an old printer, a glass jar of green sea glass, and a few white shells like bits of truth polished by waves. Each week brought more knocks. Some arrived in tears, some with creased folders, some needing nothing more than a place to speak. I saw myself in them, people underestimated, exploited, but still clinging to the belief that justice exists. Adrian stopped by with 2 hot coffees. He sat beside me, eyes sweeping the posters, charts, and clipped thank you cards crowding the corkboard. I can't believe your foundation's grown like this, he said, pride thickening his voice. You turned pain into light. I smiled and set the cup down. The light of justice, not a halo. God forgives. Justice remembers. He nodded slowly. I looked at him. Not a man running from the truth anymore, but one who bows to what's right. My heart felt as light as the wind crossing the porch from the sea. I no longer fear want. The days of counting on church food baskets have drifted far behind me, and I'm not ashamed to remember them. They taught me the dignity of endurance. There's something worth more than money: self-respect. When a person holds on to it, they haven't truly been defeated, even when they lose everything else. Every morning, I still steep a pot of tea, open the door, and let the light in. Sunlight touches the driftwood frame. Edward's arm around my shoulders, his eyes kind and steady. I smile. If only you could see this, you'd be proud of me, wouldn't you? Not for the restitution, but for the strength you once loved in me, never letting anyone else define my worth. That afternoon, after Adrian left the foundation, I opened the blue ledger, the cobalt-bound book that had followed me all this way, and wrote the closing line for this leg of the journey. The mission bell carried long and low outside, like time breathing. I closed the ledger, as if finishing a prayer. No need for revenge, no need for applause, just the quiet of knowing that even in a hard world, honesty still has a place to stand. I blew out the candle beside the frame. A thread of smoke thinned into the salt air. In the dark, I whispered, "Thank you, Clara. Thank you for taking so much, so that I could finally learn the most important thing in life isn't holding on. It's knowing how to rise again." A year later, Santa Barbara bloomed into spring. Wildflowers dressed the hills. The ocean turned silk blue. The phone rang, a woman's cheerful voice. "Mrs. Ruth Ellison, congratulations! You've been selected by Santa Barbara County for your contribution to social justice and elder protection. We'd be honored if you'd speak at next week's ceremony." I went quiet, not out of pride, but disbelief. A year ago, I was counting cans of soup. Now they called me a symbol of quiet justice. The ceremony was held at Santa Barbara County Superior Court, the place where justice had been spoken a year before. I chose a pale blue dress, simple as my life. When I stepped up, applause filled the hall. In the front row, Adrian in a white shirt, his eyes bright with a pride I hadn't seen in years. The host introduced me. "Mrs. Ruth Ellison, founder of Grace Tides Foundation, who turned private pain into a force for dignity among seniors. I stood at the wooden podium, hands a little unsteady, voice firm. Thank you. Today I'm not telling my story. I'm telling the story of an unnamed mother deceived by her own daughter-in-law, robbed of both money and trust. The hall went still. There was a time I thought silence after betrayal was noble, but I learned this. When someone steals your trust, reclaim it with truth. No shouting, no hatred, just paperwork, process, and patience. Because truth holds a power no punishment can match. The applause rose, long and warm. Adrian wiped his eyes. I nearly cried, not from sorrow, but because my son finally understood. I lowered my voice, deeper and softer, as if speaking to every heart that has cracked. Justice isn't only in court. It begins the moment we dare to say, enough, even when the one who's wrong is someone we love. That is the greatest courage. Afterward came photos, flowers, handshakes. On the courthouse steps, a light spring rain fell. Streetlights turned the drops to sparks. Adrian draped his jacket over my shoulders. Mom, I've never seen you shine like you did tonight. I took his hand. It's not the award, son. It's that you're here, and that now you truly understand what honesty means. He smiled, eyes still wet. I promise I'll live by it. Ma. That night at home, I sat at the table, opened the blue ledger one last time for this journey, and wrote, "A mother's greatest victory isn't in a judgment. It's in teaching her child the value of honesty." I closed the book. Outside, the tide clock ticked its slow measure, the jar of sea glass casting a quiet green into the family frame. Edward, me, and little Adrian. 3 faces in one photograph, 3 slices of time bound by a single truth. Love doesn't die, it only changes form. I smiled. My life isn't loud or lavish or grand, but it is full in its own way. Still, clear, and at peace. If you'd like me to share more true-to-life stories of women who reclaimed justice and dignity through Grace Tides, tell me in the comments.